Well, greetings and welcome, everybody, to another edition of the Psych Monologues. I am Dr. Mitsch, your host, coming to you from the Northern Command Post in a super secret location in order to save everybody else from the pain of knowing where I live. I don't know. It just sounds like an interesting thing to say for what it's worth. So I'm glad to be with you. Thanks for joining me on a Monday morning or throughout the week of the 27th. We are at the end of February. It is just wild how quickly February goes by. So let me introduce things a little bit in terms of if you've never heard from this podcast before, you tuned in thinking, I wonder what this is about. Well, let me tell you. The Psych Monologues is a podcast exploring the intersection of faith, psychology, and spiritual formation. In a lot of cases, and I say this often, a lot of cases people don't see these things going together very well. And so I am beginning to realize just how unique it is to have this conversation and how important it is, really, because I think in most cases, a lot of Christ followers believe that psychology really has nothing to offer us. But the problem is their definition of psychology. And I'm not going to get into the deep weeds of all of that as to the differences and everything else. Quite honestly, church fathers have been doing psychology actually for a long, long time. It's never been identified or labeled that way. We think of psychology as the current contemporary version of it, which is only about 125 years old or so. But I think you can make a pretty good case that we've been doing psychology and talking psychology for 2,500 years in the faith, and therefore it has a very important role to play in our spiritual formation. Sometimes, and I just heard this today in a sermon, we kind of ignore the psych piece that is a part of spiritual formation, and we act like it really isn't all that important when actually, in fact, it is. So that's the purpose behind doing a podcast like this. I have picked up various topics along the way that have caught my attention that I hope are of interest to you. And the Psych Monologue was really the beginning point, and then it gave birth to an even bigger organization, bigger in, I don't know, whatever sense. It's not, I mean, technically, in terms of size, who knows what the difference is between these two things. The Psych Monologue's been around for 3 years. Stained Glass International has just gotten started, except that it has a broader appeal. Certainly, that's my hope. It has a broader mission than Psych Monologues does because it's simply a podcast that's looking at this particular area in terms of our lives and spiritual lives. But Stained Glass International's mission is to equip, encourage, and empower the next generation of Christians to live authentically in relationship to Jesus, others, and themselves. We're really good at the first, well, I wouldn't say good, but we very much focus on Jesus and others, but we don't focus on ourselves. And again, it was something that I was reminded of even this morning as I was at church and I was listening to the sermon, and I put in my notes, but yeah, what about ourselves? Because the pastor was right. He was talking about the fact that our relationship with God betrays how we will oftentimes interact with other people. And that's true. But he kind of sidestepped the issue of what do we do with ourselves and how does that work itself out with others? Even if you don't add the spiritual dimension to it, it still shows up. And so what we're trying to do and what I'm trying to do in the formation of Stained Glass International was to develop what I call outposts for the heart and communities for the soul. I don't know where we're going to land as far as what the name is. My hope and call is to form outpost groups in whatever communities out there, and that SGI would serve the purpose of providing materials and support and encouragement in those groups living authentically, not only with one another, but also, like I said, in their relationship to Jesus And how do they deal with themselves? And I've been doing groups at CCU for, 13 years. And it's an uncharted territory, quite honestly. And what is our relationship with ourselves? We're the only being in the universe that can have a relationship with the thing we call ourself. And because of that, that has a direct impact on how we relate to others. So oftentimes we find our best solution to dealing with and changing and making changes in ourselves, and then we apply it to other people without really knowing whether or not that really fits them or not. So Outposts for the Heart is meant to be a place where you can take off the mask and your armor, because a lot of times we might take off the mask, we won't take the armor off, because we don't trust the people that we're in community with, even though we rhapsodize about community. And so Outposts are this place of safety out of the what do I want to say? The fury and the smoke and the chaos of the world that we live in every day, and take a deep breath emotionally, spiritually, personally, and connect with one another and get our hearts connected and full, and then go out and get after it again. So I invite you, thank you, like I said, thank you for joining me. I invite you to pull up a chair or get comfortable, relax. My hope is we can talk about issues that matter the most to you, where you live, excuse me, what you think, how you feel about living life with yourself and others, and ultimately with Jesus. So here's the thing. I'm embarking on a little bit more of a predictable schedule for the things that we talk about here at Psych Monologues. And what I want to do is I want to look at 3 different things over the course of a month. I want to look at what gets in the way of our relationship with God and Jesus. So barriers. And I'm going to spend some time. I'm going to take one episode. Wow. I am choking here, folks. One episode to pay attention and talk a little bit about that. And that's what tonight will be. And then I want to take another episode in a month and talk about broken people of the Bible. We tend to forget about them. And we tend to forget just how much it betrays God's heart toward us. We can read something in the Bible and it's 2-dimensional. It's not really 3-dimensional. There are people that are living another life in another time, and it really has no relevance to us at all. And my hope is in the episode that is about broken people of the Bible, that it will breathe life into those stories so that it connects with where we're living. And so there's that. And then there's another one that I'd like to spend some time on each month for an indefinite period of time. And I can get sidetracked. I think if anybody out there is a student of mine, they know I very easily can get sidetracked onto something else. So there's always, a wild card in there that I get a wild hair. I've heard a sermon that sets me off, and I want to rant about it. But there's that, barriers to God and the broken people of the Bible. And then the last one is just, what does the spiritual journey actually look like, and what are the key elements of that? Now, you may say, I'm tapped out. I'm out. I'm not interested even in a spiritual journey, and that's fine. You can be, and my implication isn't where you should be. My implication is talking about where you are, and sometimes it's helpful. I'm not going to say it's helpful all the time, but sometimes it's helpful to put it into a larger context as far as where we've come from and where we're going and how it fits together. Okay, so that's the third thing, and then the fourth is a wild card. I don't know what that will be or how it will be, but each week you will see the Barriers to God episode, you'll see Broken People of the Bible episode, and then you'll see the Spiritual Journey episode. So, and they will fill in, and that's to give you just a heads up about what's coming down the road here. I think tonight is going to be the Barriers to God. I think next week we'll look at which will be the fourth week of February. So it's going to be the last week of the month. We're going to look at the broken people of the Bible. I've got one in particular that I want to focus in on and spend some time talking about as far as how it connects up with who we are and where we are, and even our relationship with Jesus for that matter. So there's that, okay? And that's just a heads up for what's coming and for what it's worth. I'll do my best to stay on track. There may be times that I go off track. So, put it into four-wheel drive and hope for the best that we don't run over a cliff. But tonight I want to talk about one in particular that I want to be really clear before I get into it so that you know where I'm coming from. And oftentimes I have been known to say, if you want to know where somebody's taking a stand, figure out where they sit. In other words, the things that they're assuming to be true, or the things that they're entering into the conversation with. And this one in particular is one that I have had multiple conversations of late that really has reminded me how important it actually is. And this particular barrier to God is one that I think pretty much everybody can relate to. Pretty much. We hit a crisis of faith, and we call it that, right? And the issue is being angry with God, being just so mad that you just want to turn your back and walk away and tap out and say, I'm done with this stuff. If this is how you treat the people that you refer to as your children, I hate to see how you treat your enemies, so I'm done. I'm not going to be part of this whole party. So before I get into it, I want to make one thing really clear. One is, get behind me in line, because I've been there, I've done that, and I cycle through it on a regular basis about frustration and irritation and anger at God that he's not, there's a lot there, but he's not doing what I think he should do. Now, we won't even start into that I have now nominated myself as the consultant to God. After all, he needs one, right? So the other thing I want to say is this, is that I am not here, and I want to get this clear right up front. I am not here to prohibit anybody from getting angry with God. There is something about getting angry with God that we have this reflexive sense of shame about, that I'm being somehow bad if I get mad at God. As if he can't take it, might be one side of that coin. The other side of it is my embrace of God is so fragile that I can't take being mad at him. And the thing is that I'm not going to prohibit you from doing that. That's not really how I roll. And so I'm not going to say, don't do that. I'm not. And like I said, take a place in the line behind me. I've done all this stuff. I've been there. There have been moments in time in my life history that I've said, I'm out. I am done with this church thing. I'm done with you, God, and just count me out. I've had enough. And somehow we think that puts us on the outs with God. And I think we have to think through, lest I steal some of my own thunder later, but I think we have to think through Does my anger separate me from God, or does it separate God from me? So I'm not here to prohibit anything that you feel or the things that you accuse God of or any of those things. I think the annoying part about a lot of that is he doesn't answer. And so we stay confirmed in our beliefs rather than looking into what he has given us to reveal himself to us. And we think that's so complicated and so deep and so theological that it's nothing that I can really wade my way through to try to figure out exactly where he's coming from. And so as if any new information would make any difference at all. Because the bottom line is, I want to be pissed at somebody, and God's the best candidate right now because he's the most powerful. He's the one that could, and fill in the blank. Make it different, make it better, change things, whatever the condition is, okay? So I'm not here to prohibit anybody from doing this because I understand and get it. The other thing is we spend a lot of time, particularly in our culture today, believing that if I just figured out why, then somehow it would go away or I would be able to do something about it. And the funny thing about it is it doesn't. I mean, it's a real complicated answer. It doesn't. Just because I know why doesn't mean I'm going to change anything, because our anger is built on our irritation, our abandonment, our hurt, all manner of emotions. I mean, anger oftentimes is very much like a big ball of yarn that has a whole bunch of strands in it. And if we believe that if I could just figure out why, then maybe I wouldn't be so angry, that's overly simplistic to say one thing. To say another, there's some satisfaction in getting angry at a being that is so much powerful than I am and so outside the realm of what I can understand, that either I can control him by containing him and being mad at him, or I can trust him, but I don't want to do that. I feel like he's betrayed me. So figuring out why is not an answer. And psychologists have pursued this for generations, as if knowing why will actually change anything. Actually, it doesn't. Sooner or later, I simply have to move in some other direction than the one I'm currently moving in that doesn't seem to be working very well, even just on that pragmatic level. So there's another part of this that I think we have to talk about when we're talking about being angry at God, and that is we assume that if we're mad at God, he'll be mad back. So, and a lot of times we know that from personal experience. You get mad at somebody, you get upset with them, and they get upset back because you're getting upset with them, and now we're upset because they're upset with us about our upset. This really gets fun. And so it just, we do something that I would call anthropomorphize God. In other words, we make him human. We make him interact with us the way all other humans do, who usually don't have enough boundaries. And this is where boundaries come in. And God actually has pretty good boundaries. It's like, he ultimately, and I think we could all agree, he ultimately understands me at a level even deeper than I do. And so he knows that living in this life is filled with hurt and brokenness and being betrayals and abandonment. He knows all that stuff, and that actually makes a difference for him. Not that not that it doesn't create separation between us and him. I'm not saying that at all. But that's not his deal. It's ours. We want separation from somebody who we hold ultimately accountable and Yeah, ultimately accountable for what has happened to us, even though it is so far outside of the realm of how he actually designed it. And we've gotten so far away from that we have taken the out of whack world that we live in and assume that it's normal and the way it was designed is abnormal, when in fact we're living the abnormal, and normal is what he defined in the very beginning. So there's a couple precursor ideas and thoughts that I want to put out there before I really kind of dig into this. One of the things that often happens is that our anger at God often betrays us. It betrays something going on inside of us that when it's not met, we get angry. And so how God behaves and whether he behaves the way we think he should doesn't match with how he apparently, which is a key word, apparently acts in whatever that given situation is, a broken relationship, a dashed dream, whatever that might be. And we believe that defines him as defined by us, rather than what he has actually told us about himself. There's so much about our faith in Jesus and in Christianity of a God that reveals himself to his people, and he goes to such lengths to do that he actually becomes those people, which you will not find in any other religion anywhere. So our anger betrays our hidden agendas, and they come out into the open. They burst into the open, and they betray how we think life should be, how God should be in that life of ours, and what his role actually is. And most of the time, it's a trade or a contract. God, I do all of this stuff for you. I have left this is the words, by the way. This has been around for a long, long time. As a matter of fact, you can go all the way back to a disciple who actually was following Jesus and said to him, "Look, I have left everything for you, and this is how it goes." So it implies that his definition of how life should be by giving up everything for Jesus is easy sailing. And ironically, Jesus never makes that promise. I mean, the only thing he really promises is that we'll have trouble in this life. Things still happen. It's not because he's impotent or he's not good. It's none of that. A lot of it has to do with his willingness to let us choose. And the harvest of us choosing is human evil visited on humans. That's not God's orchestration. That's human brokenness. So our anger betrays us in terms of how life should be and also how God should be. Little do we know, something I said, I apologize. Something I say in my classes a lot, I just remind students every now and again as I'm going through, because particularly in the spring, I do two particular classes that really bump into this. One is grief and loss, and the other is crisis and trauma. And we have certain expectations about how God should be, or how the world should be, whatever that is, or better yet, how life should be. And God never signed on for that. I think we would all agree that's not really what he signed on for. It's us attributing to him something that we desire. And so we walk around oftentimes with expectations that we have never articulated, but then when they go unmet, we get really upset. We get mad. We get angry because this isn't how it's supposed to be. This isn't how it should be. And see, should, that word itself, obscures reality every time, most of the time. If it's not a moral should, all right, I should tell the truth. That doesn't obscure reality. That's true. But there are thousands of other shoulds I walk around with all the time about how I should behave, how I should be seen, how people should perceive me, how I should behave. Did I already say that? I think I did. And all manner of expectations that I never really articulate, and I don't know that I have them until they go unmet. And that's exactly what happens. Our anger explodes onto the scene when an expectation we have of God that we haven't even articulated and said, wait a minute, this isn't how this is supposed to go. This shouldn't be this way. And those are the words we use. And I can tell you right now, if you want to make it difficult to talk, and I'm not making an assignment for anybody, but notice how many shoulds you use, because it is a demand on the universe at large, or people. It should oftentimes carries with it the expectation I have about the ideal world and how it's supposed to behave, or the ideal life and how it is supposed to behave. So our anger betrays us in terms of how we believe life should be, how we believe God should be, and then finally also how we should be. And that's where shame usually weasels its way into the conversation one way or another, because we have an unidentified ideal that we compare ourselves to. And the funny thing about that ideal is it always floats higher than where we are. It always floats higher than where we are, which means we're always in a failure state, which also means that I am a failure, which is the basis of any shame. So our anger with God oftentimes has to do with our expectations of him that he never signed on for, but we have them anyway. And if you're really spoiling for a fight, you can say, well, he's God, he should know that. There's that word again. And so I had a conversation with a group of students not that long ago about this very idea about the anger at God. And it led to a lot of wandering and a lot of wilderness experiences in their spiritual life. And the expectation, if you will, that if I'm angry with God, God won't want me back. Which couldn't be farther from the truth. Because the one thing we're told is that he was willing to die for us even when we hated him. Now, how much worse can that get? So, anger with God is not something that alienates us from God, although we think it does. So, anger separates me from God, but it does not separate God from me. And I have to grapple with that somehow, because being angry with somebody and them not doing what I demand that they do puts me at loggerheads with them. It puts me in a stalemate. Either they change or I change. But the tipping point in that is that, again, we have the only God that says, I get it. I know what fatigue feels like. I know what being betrayed feels like. I know what loss feels like. I know what helplessness feels like because I lived in a human body. I know what that feels like. We're the only faith that has a God that says, yeah, me too. I get it. I get it. And we might say, well, that's not good enough. By gummit, that is not good enough. You have got to, and X, Y, and Z, and then suddenly what comes tumbling out of our mouths is this contract that, again, God never signed. And we don't really care. I mean, when we're angry, we don't, right? I don't care whether you signed or not. You're God. You can do whatever you want. And implied is you can do whatever you want, including do what I tell you to do. But who's God then? I'm just asking. So what is our expectations? Is our expectations that God will make life easier? And I take you back to something I said in the last episode, 126, when I talked about David talking about walking through the valley of the shadow of death. You'll be with me. And our mindset is, with me is not good enough. You've got to fix it. You've got to get me out of this valley. And see, is God the God of the universe and the God that has made it possible for us to be in a relationship with him? He's not asking for us to grovel at his feet. He's calling us into sonship and daughtership in his family. And so it's not always going to make life any easier. Now, while that is big T truth, that is not where I live. I get that. That's what I call little T truth. That's not where I live. And either I can bludgeon myself with big T truth, or I can accept the fact that that's where I'm at, and I'm feeling abandoned and alone and betrayed, and wish somebody would come along and just make it a little better. So there's one other thing I would add in here, and that is something that I say to my students all the time as I teach the crisis and trauma class. God, people in our lives, and I'm not sit God to the side here for a second, however you do that, but you know what I mean. So people in our lives don't need to hear our profundity. They just need to feel our presence. Somehow, because it's God, the rules change. His presence isn't enough. We want him to fix the problem rather than be present with us and give us whatever strength we need to get through it. It may be messy and it may not look real neat, but he's still with us through it. So our expectations of God are things that he never promised to us. And one is to make life easier. The other one is to prevent bad things from happening. And at some level, I think we know the world we live in. We know how broken it is, but we know it, but we hope for something else. And that hope wars against what we know. And that hope blinds us from the way things are. And so God says, look, through David, I'll be with you. I'll be with you through this. I offer you my presence. And really, as humans, that's the most I have to offer somebody. It doesn't mean that I can't use words at times to encourage, but it's got to be fitted and shaped according to the person's needs, not according to my need to feel helpful or my need to sound profound. It's not that way. It's not for that. And so there's that expectation. It's kind of a big, broad category. The other one is, I did my part, God, so what's up with you? The contracts and trades idea. We think so easily, we fall into that way of thinking so easily that we just don't even notice it. How quickly we write a contract to say, okay, God, sign off, rather than all I've got is you, and that's about it. And that's one of the hardest lessons I've been learning, is all I've got is him. Even in the face of people making bad choices, and for me, kids making bad choices and having difficult times and running aground, and me feeling so completely helpless as a parent, and all I've got is saying, okay, all I got is you, God. I got to enter into this and do the best I can. It may not go real well. I don't know what's coming at me, but all I can do is just lock arms with you and not hope for the best. Just hope to be faithful. I don't know how it's to make it sound other than that. It's not to sound real churchy or anything like that. It's just to hang on for dear life. If you've watched anything of The Chosen, at the very end, when Peter decides to get out of the boat and walk to Jesus, it is a very, very compelling scene when he says, "Don't let me go." And Jesus says, "I got you. I got you." And that's such a profound phrase and yet so simple. And we diminish it by saying, but that's not enough. You got to fix it. Whether you got me or not is not nearly as important. Now, one last thing I want to mention, and that is, what is the results? What are the outcomes of us nurturing anger? And we will. So I'm going to come back to it. We will. And somehow, because anger oftentimes gives us power, and it helps us to feel powerful in a very powerless situation. But there is a cost. There's a cost. And again, I know this landscape so well because I've wandered it. I've wandered it so many times. And one of the results is spiritual drift. And we just become apathetic. We become apathetic. We are unresponsive. It's not as important anymore. It'll be what it's going to be, or whatever the phrase is we use. And there's drift. And unless we're under power, we're going to drift. And so spiritual drift is a cost of nurturing and nourishing anger to find power enough to get through a day or to get through a relationship or make changes, because that's short-lived too. And so there's this spiritual drift that comes, and then there's also the assumption that I've been gone for so long, God would not take me back. He wouldn't take me back. I've been gone for so long. You know, the funny thing about it is, with the story of the prodigal, we're not told how far and how long he was gone from his father. We're not told that at all. And I can't help in the brilliance that Jesus had in telling that story that he left some key details out for a very good reason, because it can be years and years, or it can be days, or it can be hours. That we can be, I've been gone for so long, he'll never take me back. And as a matter of fact, we saw that in the thoughts of the son, the prodigal, as he was walking back. Because he was thinking, my dad's going to do to me what I've been doing to myself. And so I've been punishing myself. That's what my dad's going to do. So I'll cut him a deal, and cut him a deal to make me less than a son, so that I can at least just have the roof over my head and food in my belly. And God the Father, as pictured in that story, would have nothing to do with it. Not only that, he just pours on the grace and the love in putting his robe on his son and covering the filth of where he's come from, and putting his ring back on his finger to reestablishing him as son, which includes daughters. It includes anyone. He restores to fellowship, and he looks for us. He looks for us. He waits for us. And so it doesn't matter how long. He doesn't have... I made this comment to my wife not that long ago. It's like, what's really remarkable is that when God became man in Jesus, he actually imprisoned himself in time. He never knew that before. It's not that he couldn't, but he imprisoned himself in time. And so time, he has a different perspective about time than we do. And then finally, spiritual inertia tends to set in. We just get less and less interested in expending the energy necessary to do these kinds of things. And whether it's listening to some podcast like mine or just listening to Scripture, I've got a good friend of mine. He's the voice of Daily Audio Bible. He reads Scripture every day. I wouldn't recommend the Old Testament right now because it is hard to get through. It's Leviticus, and I wouldn't put that on my worst enemy. It's really hard to listen. But man, there's a lot of things that he reads in the New Testament, in Mark and Matthew, the Synoptic Gospels, that paints a picture of our life. And they were meant to, that Jesus entered into those places. And so there are dramatic results, costs to us not trying to engage in a way that will resolve our anger and place the anger where it rightfully belongs. I mean, if this is evil that has fallen on us because of the broken world that we live in, then point it at the people that have done it or the person who has done it, not at somebody that designed the world differently than the one that we experience right now. And take that time to start the journey home. Not get there, not tomorrow, but start the journey home. It doesn't take, I wouldn't say that, because when I've been where the prodigal was, it was like, this is a monumental step that I don't have the energy to do. And that's the inertia speaking, really. So we can take baby steps. We can take small steps in the right direction. It's still a direction away from where we're heading. There's a saying in AA that you can't hit bottom until you decide to stop digging, until you stop digging. And that's the same thing here with anger. We gain something out of our anger, and we don't see what the cost is until we step back and kind of resolve in our minds what the dynamic is here, what's going on, that I demand some answers versus versus investing our trust. We demand the answers so we don't have to trust, but the alternative is investing our trust and maybe getting some answers, really. So that's the thought as far as today and the barrier to God in terms of anger. Hopefully that has given you something to chew on and to think about. There's lots of examples in Scripture of people that have gotten angry with God. Job, for one. There are others. There are plenty of Psalms that David wrote. That is one in particular I think of where he says in one translation, "Are you just going to keep watching?" And that sounds familiar. I don't know about you, but it certainly sounds familiar to me. So anyway, some things to think about. If there's anything I'm talking about, by the way, just DM me your questions. I'd love to answer or talk about them or bring them up on the podcast for further discussion and thought about that. If you want more information, you can hit the website at drmitch.com. You can subscribe there. There's a keep in touch box at the bottom of the page, and we're happy to let you know, and you'll be notified when anything new comes up, a new blog post, a new entry. The video I not too long ago I did a Shame and Grace workshop at CCU a few weeks ago. That's on the website now, so you can go to presentations or lectures and see that presentation on the, what do I call that? Never Enough, a journey from shame to grace. And so you can take a look at that. The other thing I'd mention to you, I haven't been mentioning it as frequently, is an email devotional that I developed. And I'm using content from a devotional that me and two other friends of mine wrote many years ago, at least almost 30 years ago now. That was about setting new boundaries and healthy relationships. So it is one way that you can support and partner with SGI and our efforts in trying to continue the conversation and dialogue with the next generation. And you get something that will help you think every other day in a week. You'll get something to think about as far as setting new boundaries and healthy relationships and things like that. The other thing is that you can find us anywhere on the social media, at least 3 social media outlets: Instagram at The Psych Monologues, Facebook at ray.mitsch, M-I-T-S-C-H, and LinkedIn, drmitch.com. The podcast, please subscribe so you're notified of any new episodes that come out, and you can listen in on that. Spotify, Stitcher, iTunes, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, any of those podcast places that you listen to podcasts, you can find us there. And as I mentioned with the devotionals, if you're interested in partnering with us, thank you. Thank you so much for considering that to grow our scholarship fund for the silent retreats that are offered for newly graduated college students and those that are going to CCU and other universities. All of your gifts are tax deductible. So you can go to the bottom of the front page of the website at drmitch.com. At the very bottom, there's a donate, and you can decide whether to give to the Silent Retreat Fund or whether you can give to the fund that actually drives along SGI and all the efforts to develop materials and support leaders that are trying to develop these outpost groups wherever, really. So you can do that. If you prefer to send a physical check, you are welcome to do that. You can make it out to Stained Glass International. The address is SGI, P.O. Box 160, East Lake, Colorado 80614. So that's it for tonight. Thanks so much for joining me. I hope you have a great week. I will be here waiting for you next time. And until then, love you. Later. Bye.